I'd like to start on behalf of all the museum curators here by renewing our thanks to Brian and Anna, not only for today, but for 35 years in which the ceramic fair has been, certainly for me and for many others, the most important way in which one has seen one's colleagues, both museum colleagues from abroad and colleagues from the art trade, from the academic world and collectors. And we're all very, very warmly grateful to them. One of the ways in which Maiolica commissions in the Renaissance came about was women giving presents to other women, inside or beyond the family. In November 1524, Eleonora Gonzaga, the Duchess of Urbino, who'd recently, with her husband, Francesco Maria della Rovere, been able to return to Urbino and take back control of their duchy, wrote to her mother, who was no less a person than the so-called First Lady of the Renaissance, Isabella d'Este, the widowed Marchioness of Mantua. Eleonora wrote, "Thinking of visiting Your Excellency," I wish my children would call me Your Excellency, I must say, "with some of the products of this country which might please you, and not finding at this time anything which seemed to me to the purpose, I've had made a service," and the word she uses is credenza, a word we'll come back to, "a service of earthenware vessels, and I'm sending it to Your Excellency, since the maestri of this country of ours have some reputation for good work. And if it pleases Your Excellency, I shall be happy, and you might make use of it at Porto, since it is a country villa thing. A cosa da villa is the Italian." A reminder, Urbino at the top, Mantua at the bottom, Mantua looking particularly romantic, and for those of you whose grasp of the topography of Italy is not perhaps completely solid, halfway up the Adriatic, the east coast, you see Ancona, and above that Pesaro, Urbino, and its neighboring ceramic center town, Casteldorante, just inland from Pesaro. You go up the coast and you pass Faenza, a great ceramic center which gives us the word faience, and you pass Ferrara, and going up into inland, there is Mantua. This letter of Eleonora's, found in the Mantuan archives a few years ago, has become one of the key texts for the understanding of historiato, that is, narrative-painted Maiolica, which was at this time coming to be regarded as an Urbino speciality. Porto, where Eleonora imagined Isabella would use the service, was Porto Mantovano, Isabella's country retreat outside the capital city, Mantua. In such a place, Isabella would enjoy the gardens and spend time with cultured friends, especially women friends, and men of letters, listen to music, and engage in sophisticated literary conversation. The phrase cosa da villa, a country villa thing, in the letter is eloquent. When on duty, on formal occasions in Mantua, court decorum, and we've seen that in wonderfully spectacular form in Catherine's talk, would have required Isabella to eat off gold or silver. But in the relaxed world of her country villa and its gardens, Maiolica with classical subject matter was appropriate, and no doubt provided a starting point for literary conversation, on the lines recreated, for those of you who know the book, in Baldassare Castiglione's influential book, The Courtier. I show you a rather fantastical vision of a party said to be set in one of the Duke of Mantua's parks by the Flemish painter Sebastian Franks. It's rather later than Isabella's time, probably about 1600, but gives an idea, if a highly coloured one, of the atmosphere of such a villa gathering. The short story writer, Matteo Bandello, describes a visit to Porto Mantovano when Castiglione was also present. After dinner, Isabella asked Bandello to read a passage from Livy, and the discussion then focused on whether the Roman heroine Lucretia had been right to commit suicide. On this sort of occasion, Maiolica painted with subjects from Ovid's Metamorphoses found an ideal context. There's Isabella, rather earlier, younger Isabella, drawn by Leonardo da Vinci, and 4 plates from the service that Eleonora sent in the autumn of 1524 to her mum, with the arms of the widowed Isabella, Marchioness of Mantua, in the center, and classical subject matter around. Top left, one in a private collection in Bremen with the race of Hippomenes and Atalanta. Top right, in Boston, a series of scenes of Perseus and Andromeda. Bottom left, a magnificently drunken, indeed rather unladylike, Silenus being carried in procession, and that's in the Lehman collection at the Metropolitan. And bottom right, in Melbourne, Jupiter coming in a cloud of flame to his lover Semele, who was duly consumed by said flames. And here's another one, rather closer to. This is Apollo and Daphne. This one's in the British Museum. And this shows rather clearly the sort of strip cartoon technique which you get in a Renaissance Maiolica of this period. The source is a woodcut in a very important book for the Renaissance decorative arts, an illustrated version of the Metamorphoses of Ovid in Italian, published in Venice in 1497, with these jolly little woodcuts. And you can see how the painter, Nicola da Urbino, who is the sort of Raphael of Maiolica painting, who established the classic manner of Urbino Maiolica, has arranged the various scenes, as it were, on a donut round the arms, and the rather pale, plain, and primitive woodcut has turned into a lyrical and rather natural composition. At the top, there is Apollo talking to Cupid and saying, put that bow down. Bows are man's weapons. You're not allowed bows and arrows. So Cupid gets his own back by shooting Apollo, who duly falls in love with Daphne. So Apollo runs after Daphne, who doesn't fancy him, and she prays to her father, who is the river god, who is down at the bottom, and he changes her duly into a laurel tree. You can see she is changing into a laurel tree in order to evade his attentions. And at bottom, on the left is another scene where Apollo has conquered the monstrous dragon called Python. And so a whole series of successive episodes from the Ovid poem have been, I think, beautifully, naturally, and deftly united by Nicola da Urbino into the composition. And bottom right, a drawing you will all know from Cipriano Piccolpasso's 3 books of the potter's art, written in the 1550s, with a series of Maiolica painters around this ingenious circular table on which their colours can be whizzed round so they can choose their colours, but pinned up on the wall are a series of prints, drawings, or book illustrations from which they can take their inspiration. Now, so this is the set that Eleonora sent to her mum, and there are 22 pieces surviving scattered around the world. Now, Eleonora's letter says the service was to be used at Porto. Maiolica was never too good to use. In 16th century Italy, precious metal objects were far more valuable than Maiolica ever was. In 1530, the agent of Federico, Duke of Mantua, Isabella's son, could buy nearly 100 pieces of Urbino Istoriato Maiolica for 25 scudi. At about the same time, a silver-gilt salt, designed by the Mantua court artist, Giulio Romano, for Federico, cost 31 ducats for materials and 20 ducats for the goldsmith's labour, not counting payment to Giulio. Since a ducat and a scudo are similar in value, one silver-gilt salt, albeit unusually elaborate and designed by a prestigious artist, was approximately equivalent in value to 200 good-quality pieces of Istoriato Maiolica. Chinese porcelain, too, though never as expensive as precious metal, was much more valuable than even the smartest Maiolica, and it, too, was regularly used at table. Around the time that Giulio was making his salt, it was reported that Pope Clement VII used Historiato Maiolica at table, but only when cardinals came to dinner. Specially commissioned table services had been around for some years, some 40 years, when Nicola painted the set for Isabella. The earliest of which we have pieces is also one of the grandest, made for Matthias Corvinus, the humanist king of Hungary. There he is at the top, and his wife, the Neapolitan Queen Beatrice of Aragon. Those of you who were at the Maiolica seminar, which Sam Fogg organised last month, may remember me arguing the case that this set was made about 1488 in Pesaro, as a gift to Beatrice from her cousin Camilla, regent of Pesaro, who was keen to encourage and raise the prestige of the local Pesaro Maiolica industry. So if this is right, this is another gift between women. Around 1500, the technical capacity of Maiolica painters, and especially their ability to represent three-dimensional space on the surface of a plate, roared ahead. The Maiolica painter at work on this dish in the V&A, painted at Cafaggiolo near Florence about 1510 by the painter Jacopo, is dressed no less elegantly than his affluent clients who are watching him. The plate is evidently, if you think dust, not so much a realistic representation of a pottery as a kind of manifesto for the Maiolica painter as gentleman artist, not humble artisan, in the age of artist superstars like Raphael, who was, of course, from Urbino himself. The set from which these plates come was painted by Nicola da Urbino very shortly after the one for Isabella, and was probably a gift to friends of Isabella's, Valente Gonzaga of Brescia and his wife Violante. The subject matter here is a bit more varied, but again heavily dependent on Ovid's Metamorphoses. Europa and the Bull at the top from Ovid, the strange subject of Perillus and the Bull, an inventor who made for a Sicilian tyrant a bull in which he could roast people who had behaved in a way that the tyrant disapproved of, and as they roasted, their screams sounded like the bull roaring, and the tyrant thought it was the appropriate thing to do to try this out on the inventor. So that's a story from the Roman writer Valerius Maximus. In another story from Ovid, the story of sickness and sickness, centre left, Perseus and Andromeda, centre right, and St. George and the Dragon, after Raphael's painting of the subject a few years before. I'll come back to this set. As the 16th century went on, the choice of subject matter and Maiolica services became more ambitious and systematic. Dining rituals became more elaborate, and services became larger and more complex. These two plates, the lower run a recent gift to the Ashmolean, are from a series numbering at least 114 pieces, which meticulously represent scenes from the war between the Romans and Hannibal of Carthage, following the account in Livy's history. This set was made in the most successful and ambitious of Urbino workshops, the one run by Guido Fontana in the 1550s. You see, the bottom right one has a running number, and those numbers go up to 114. About the same time, there are some 50-odd surviving pieces, including these magnificent jugs at the top, from a large set, which is unusual in being painted with pure landscapes, without any narrative content at all. It was painted for the Florentine Jacopo Salviati and bears the Salviati family arms. It was probably painted about the time of his marriage in 1559, and a detailed inventory in 1583 shows it included jugs, wine coolers, and 5 sizes of plates, seemingly making up a service for 24 diners. But about the time these last two sets were made, taste was changing. And a new taste was coming in for services painted with grotesque ornament on a white ground, ultimately derived from Roman wall paintings. I'm sure most of you know that the word grotesque in the Renaissance is a technical term for decoration imitating the Roman wall paintings that were found in underground chambers in ancient Roman houses like Nero's Golden House next to the Colosseum, and those were known by the Romans as grotte, underground grottos, and so the decoration is grotesque. This fashion for grotesques was spearheaded by Guido Fontana's son, Orazio. This large vase in Philadelphia and the elaborate oval dish, one of 2 in the Met, are painted with scenes from the Spanish romance Amadis of Gaul, and they have numbered scenes inscribed in Spanish. I'm afraid you may not be able to see, but the Spanish inscriptions and numbers are on the back of that. There are no arms, but there's reason to believe they form part of a service with components of varied forms, commissioned in 1559 by the Duke of Urbino as a diplomatic gift for Ruy Gomez da Silva, a Spanish grandee influential at the court of King Philip II of Spain. These two pieces, with the arms of Bavaria, are, I think, likely to have been part of another diplomatic gift. In 1586, Wilhelm V, Duke of Bavaria, received a gift of Urbino Maiolica from the Duke of Urbino. He and his wife liked it so much that they asked for more, requesting in good counter-Reformation spirit that the painters should be told not to put anything on them which has anything improper about it. So no naughty bits in the grotesques, please. The second consignment that was duly sent consisted of 272 pieces of widely varying shapes and sizes, including candelabra, wine coolers, and flower vases. Piece on the right, maybe one of the flower vases. Unfortunately, some of the large jars of the second consignment were broken in transit. The Urbino ambassador, writing back to report to Urbino about it, noted soothingly in a praise that, though intended to play down the importance of the damage, is a striking indication of how the most elaborate Maiolica could sometimes be seen as for display rather than for use. Since their only purpose is to look good, it will be easy to put the damage right. The word Eleonora used in the letter with which I began this talk was credenza. Credenza has two meanings. It could describe a service of metalwork or ceramics, or it could describe a tiered, buffet-like piece of furniture on which they could be displayed. The Renaissance credenza was the successor to a long medieval tradition by which kings and princes would show off their wealth and rank by displaying silver and gold plate at banquets. And we have seen the truly spectacular level at which this was brought at the British court at the time of George IV, and I imagine we will be hearing more about this in the time of Henry VIII from Tim Schroeder later. So the wealthier or higher ranking the host, the more tiers the buffet could have. And sometimes monarchs attached such importance to this, and again, Tim, I imagine, may mention this, that they included quantities of display plate in their luggage when they were traveling, so that when they set up temporary banqueting houses, they could have a buffet of plate. Here, though not completely at royal level, are some 15th century Italian illustrations of credenzas of buffet. Top left, Florentine painter Apollonio di Giovanni. I'm afraid the Botticelli, top right, the marriage feast of Nastagio degli Onesti, is not a very good image, but you can see in the center there are a series of plates, which I think are all silver and silver gilt. Bottom left, a painting by Bartolomeo di Giovanni, currently on loan to the National Gallery, with a very nice little miniature buffet, and a fresco of the 1460s with either parcel gilt or I think enameled silver gilt vessels in the Palazzo Altemps in Rome. Clearer and more spectacular, and indeed more in the George IV manner, is the Feast of the Gods, painted by Giulio Romano for Federico Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua, who we've already mentioned, in the Palazzo Te in Mantua in 1524. The documentary evidence and the widespread use of the word credenza to describe a service are strong indications that Historiato Maiolica could, like silver, be intended for display on a piece of furniture. Sadly, we have no images in Renaissance painting of Historiato Maiolica so displayed. The nearest things we do have are from the second half of the 16th century. Here is a painting of the Last Supper, so at a much more modest social level, in a church near Forlì, and you can see behind the apostles on the right a display of fairly ordinary-looking Maiolica, but at least at this social level, at least, you've got a kind of modest version of the credenza. And here are a couple of drawings which I hope are legible. One on the left, mid-16th century, by the Bolognese artist Niccolo dell'Abate, and you can see a tiered credenza at the back, which I take to be all precious metal, and in a rather more domestic setting, not so much a banquet display as decorative storage in this drawing by Stradanus, a Flemish artist who worked in Florence towards the end of the 16th century, with, I can't tell whether they're ceramics or silver on that piece of furniture. So in the absence of paintings, I want to put to you a piece of more indirect evidence that Maiolica painters sometimes thought as they composed their scenes of how they would look displayed on a credenza. These are the two large plates from the service of which I showed you some pieces before, made for the Calini family by Nicola da Urbino in about 1525. And underneath are the pages from the 1497 Ovid, from which the stories are taken. On the left, the musical competition between Apollo and Marsyas, and then the flaying of Marsyas by Apollo as a punishment for losing. On the right, a different musical competition, Apollo and Pan. Now, clearly, the two musical compositions are paired. These are the two large plates surviving from the set, and may, or may not, have been the only two large plates that were made. But the point I want to make is that compared to the woodcuts, Nicola has quite deliberately, for instance, incorporated in the right-hand scene a little Bramantesque temple, a match to the one on the right of the left-hand plate. The trees, the curly trees, have been added on the outside of each, and even the clouds at the top have been arranged in the same configuration. This kind of symmetry makes no sense if you were imagining these things for use on a table. The only reason for creating this kind of symmetry would be if you were imagining them displayed on a credenza. In 1576, the then Duke of Bavaria, Albrecht V, was supplied with a large Faenza service painted mainly with subjects from Roman history and Greek mythology. Over 100 pieces survive, mostly still in Munich. Around 1590, a bit more than a decade later, the Great Hall of the Residence in Munich, on your left, the Antiquarium, was remodeled with two carved walnut credenze, specially designed and installed at the upper end, and there's one of them. In 1611, a visitor described them as decked out with beautiful pagan, that's to say of classical themes, beautiful pagan jugs, bowls, and other vessels. Now, the German scholar and curator Hans Ottermeyer has argued, after calculating the shelf gaps and the size of the pots, that these wooden credenze were specifically designed and measured to display the Faenza Maiolica in this very, very prestigious location. This has, however, been more recently contested, and we have here the joy of having our colleague from Munich, Katharina Hanschmann, here with us. So, and she may be willing to comment, but I'm not going to venture to arbitrate between German scholars on this matter. But in any case, the answer to the question I started with, was the best and finest Renaissance Maiolica for use or display, is certainly both. Thank you very much.